let's remind ourselves, Romans chapter 1, you know that beginning of verse 18, Paul begins his explanation of the bad news. He's introduced the gospel, but to be able to explain what the gospel is the good news, but the only way to understand the good news is you've got to start with the bad news. And the bad news is that man universally is under sin. And in Romans 1, you have the general condemnation, not just of the Gentiles, but of all mankind. Now, a lot of people, I think, completely confuse this because they go, well, Romans 1, he goes after the Gentiles, and Romans 2, he goes after the Jews. No, he goes after all of mankind in Romans 1, but the condemnation that he brings is consistent with the entire Jewish worldview. It is soaked in the biblical worldview of God as creator. It derives its very foundation from Genesis chapter 1. And so the Jewish person hearing Romans 1's going, yeah, go Paul, keep whacking away at them Gentiles. And Paul has to turn to them and say, hey, just because you possess God's law doesn't make you righteous before God. Simply possessing it and not doing it only brings you greater condemnation. And so you have to then move on from that point and recognize that he then deals the Jewish issue. And then in chapter 3, he ties it all together. And his conclusion is, we conclude that God has subjected all people under sin. Jew and Gentile. His whole point is he does not want there to be any basis for there being a Jewish Christian church and a Gentile Christian church. Paul over and over again emphasizes, in fact, the very background of Romans chapter 3, when it says all sin comes short of the glory of God, the whole point there is the all there is not universal sinfulness like we always use it. It's Jew and Gentile. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. And he wants to make sure there is absolutely, positively no foundation for any concept that there would be a Jewish Christian church and a Gentile Christian church. Very, very important to recognize that he's doing that. So I guess I should switch sources for you here. I apologize. And give you accordance here so you can see that. Is that working for you? You got... Okay. Sorry about that. I forgot about that, but I figure if I'm going to be reading the text quickly, it would be good to be able to throw that up there as well. Got it? All right, good. So let's take a look at the text here, and I'm again not going to be able to go as fully into this as I would like, but there you go. Oh, you went and switched right back to me while I was silencing my phone. Thank you ever so much. Really appreciate that. Nothing like looking at the camera before you switch back over there. All right. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Again, the wrath of God is being revealed at all times. It is not just simply something that is going to be in the eschaton. It is present tense. It is being revealed right now. And it is against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, not just Gentiles, but of men. Now, someone might say, oh, yeah, but they are the men who suppress the truth and unrighteousness, this just must be the Gentiles and not the Jews. Again, that's, I think, a gross misreading of Paul, and it is overthrown by his own conclusion in chapter 3. But the description of men is those who, and you'll notice in the Greek, the truth in unrighteousness suppressing ones. And so when you use the article here, this article goes with this phrase, right? This term right here. And so when you have an article with the participle at the end, you stuff in between. It's a really cool way of making it very descriptive. And so it's the truth in unrighteousness suppressing ones. And so here is this description. And since God's wrath is revealed from heaven against all unrighteousness and ungodliness, so everyone who sins is involved in this suppression of the truth in unrighteousness. And as I've pointed out many, many times before, that phrase, katakanton, indicates that God's truth has been made known. It's not something we have to go searching for. It's something that is available to us right now, and therefore it is something that can be held down, and man is accountable for that. And that's exactly what Paul goes on to say. For that which is known about God is evident within them, or you may notice it's en autois, amongst them. So it could be in them internally. It can be amongst them as a people. So there is the general revelation, which is what's going to be discussed in the next verse. But of course, the witness of the conscience, the witness of the universe around us, this is all part of what general revelation is. And it's God who has made it evident to them. So this is something that God has done. God has been the one who has revealed himself. God is not hiding on a mountain someplace and we have to climb up a mountain and find him. God is the one who has manifested himself in the creation of the world. And that's why verse 21 says, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature, so his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made. And then here's a very important phrase here at the end, so that they are unapologetus, they are without an apologetic. That does not mean that they do not have arguments. That does not mean that they cannot, engage in some kind of defense of their position. But what it does mean is they cannot provide a consistent defense of their position because of the fact that they live in God's world, and therefore to live in rebellion, reject God, you're going to have to come up with a worldview that's really not going to fit with the world around you. You're going to have to borrow things from the truth that you're suppressing to hold your system together. And that's what it means that they are without an excuse. It doesn't mean that they won't make excuses, but it does mean that they cannot give a consistent excuse. For even though they knew God, and some people think that this is a theoretical thing. They could know about God. No, for even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks. They did not. The term there is doxazo, to glorify God, to honor God, and then of course there you see give thanks is the term from which we get Eucharist. It's a beautiful word. It's been stolen from us by its abuse by Romanism, but they did not glorify God or give thanks, but instead the things that the general revelation would have held them accountable to do. The general revelation that would have held them accountable for honoring God, glorifying God, giving thanks to God, being thankful. Instead, the adversative use of a law, but they became futile. They became empty in their translation here in the NASB is speculations, but you can see the term is the term which we transliterate as dialogue, the reasonings of the mind, the thinking of the mind. So this is the very innermost part of mankind. If you will not do what general revelation would demand of you to do, the result is you will be fundamentally altered in the deepest part of your being. In the deepest part of your being. And so it's said that they are made futile, and that they're and then foolish heart, yeah, but it's asunetos means lack. The term with the alpha privative is understanding. So the non-understanding, it's not foolish in the sense that we frequently use that term, but their non-understanding heart becomes darkened. And so we are on very solid ground to recognize that what Paul is talking about here is the fundamental result of sin in the experience of he who is created in the image of God. Mankind is created in the image of God. The result of that is that man is not left undamaged, but instead in the very center of man's being, there is a darkening, a foolishness, a futility, so that professing to be wise, they become fools. And so they think they're saphoi. They think that they are, philosophy, the love of wisdom. They believe them. They're professing themselves. They view themselves as wise. But instead, they have become moranos. Moranos is the descriptive term. They have become fools. This is the same contrast that Paul uses in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 between the wisdom of the world, the foolishness of the gospel, the wisdom of God versus the foolishness of the world, and so on and so forth. And so they're very quick to call themselves wise. But in fact, they become fools. And here's vitally important term. They exchange the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man and of birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. And so here it's very, very important because of this effect of those who bear the image of God suppressing that knowledge and suppressing the truth about God. There is an inevitable reaction in the creature. The creature exchanges the glory of the incorruptible God for something else, for idolatry. And what do all these things, an image in the form of corruptible man, birds, four-footed animals, and crawling creatures, what do all of these things have in common with one another? They are a part of the created order. Man's worship is to be oriented toward God, but when he suppresses the knowledge of that God, he doesn't cease being a worshiping creature. He still will worship, but instead he will turn the object of that worship away from God and to the created order. And the created order then is defined in the very language that you would expect the Apostle Paul to use. And that is, he uses the very language of Genesis 1. I mean, where do we read about man? Where do we read about birds? Where do we read about four-footed animals? Where do we read about crawling creatures? Anyone who does New Testament work today is aware of the importance of what is called intertextual studies. Intertextual studies. It is an absolute given in any serious study of Paul that the primary first order milieu of his background, the origin of his thought, is the Tanakh, the Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, the Old Testament scriptures as we call them. And furthermore, it is unquestionable that the primary bedrock of his study is the Greek Septuagint. Why? Well, because he keeps using that language. He uses the language drawn directly from the Greek Septuagint. Now, we are not saying that Paul is an insulated, Hebrew-speaking only Pharisee in Jerusalem. He grew up in Tarsus of Cilicia. He can quote pagan philosophers. He is a man of the world. He understands those things. But the bedrock, the first place you go, is the Old Testament. And so anyone looking at this, if they do not have other reasons for avoiding this, it's the same issue that we have when we look at arsenokoites. When we look at that term, 1 Corinthians 6, what's the first? Any honest exegete, what's the first thing they're going to do? They're going to go to the Old Testament and say, where did this come from? And it's obvious where it came from. Even pro-homosexual scholars and commentators all recognize that arsenokoites is derived from Leviticus 18 and 20, from the very language of the Greek Septuagint used there. There's no question about that. No one seriously disputes that. But when you find people quoting stuff from 600 years after Paul to try to find a way to say, well, we really don't know what it means, you're looking at simple scholarly dishonesty is what you're looking at, because we do know what it means. There's no question about what it means. And if it was any other subject, there wouldn't be any dispute about it at all. Same thing here. Same thing here. We'd look at this, and intertextual studies would make us go, whoa, wow, creation language, Genesis 1, ding, ding, ding. It'd just be very, very obvious. And so what's Paul doing? You have the idolatry, you have Genesis language, you have man, birds, four-footed animals, crawling creatures coming straight out of Genesis 1 and 2. Therefore, God gave them over in the lust of their hearts to impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. And so you have their somata, their bodies, and you have uncleanness or impurity. And this is in the epithumiais ton cardion, the lusts of their hearts. So is there a consistency here? Yes. The dialogues of their hearts, we just saw up above. So you have their thinking, their reasoning, their non-understanding hearts are darkened. And so if you will not have the light of God in your heart, well, then your heart is going to be darkened, and what should be true desires of the heart for God, instead, God gives them over, paradidomi, same term that's used of the betrayal of Jesus by Judas, given over. God gives them over, and the result is that their heart is filled with lusts. And if your heart doesn't have desires for God, instead, these are going to become evil desires. And so that they are turned over to impurity, and their bodies are dishonored amongst them. Now, he's going to talk a lot about dishonoring. Where should we first go to understand what it means to be dishonored? The first place we should go for Paul is to look at the wisdom literature of the Old Testament, to look at the creation narratives, to understand what it means from the biblical perspective to honor God, to be honored by God. These should be the first places we're going. Follow the argument. Follow Paul's argument. You'll notice that there's no big, huge break in here. He's talking about what the result of suppressing the truth of God is, and there being a break between the creature who bears the image of God and God himself. And so remember, there's been an exchange. They exchanged, verse 23, the glory of the incorruptible God. Therefore, God gives them over. They're dishonored in their bodies. And then verse 25, for they exchange, there it is, same root again, the truth of God for the lie. The truth of God for the lie. And they worshipped, interesting form of the term for worship, and then latruo, the highest form of worship, the worship in the very temple itself, they worshipped and served what? The creature, para ton tisanta, rather than the creator who is blessed forever. So, here is a almost restatement, very clear continuation of the same thought. When you exchange the truth of God for a lie, it's going to have an impact upon you internally, all of you, your body, your mind, your heart, your speculation. Man cannot be divided up into little parts, and, well, this stays pure and this does not. The Gnostics are all wrong about that. No. Instead, the result is when you make that exchange, when you exchange the truth of God for the lie, you're going to worship and serve the creation rather than the creator. There can be no syncretism. You can't, that's not how God's worship works. Who is blessed forever. For this reason, so there's no break here. Diatuta continues this. For this reason, God gave them over, paradidomi, once again, to degrading passions. Literally, it's dishonoring, because timao is to honor. So degrading passions. So God gave them over for this reason. It has to do with sin. It has to do with worshiping, engaging in idolatry, etc., etc. Gave them over to degrading passions, for even their women exchanged. There's exchanged again. There's that very same. It was third time now we've seen it. The natural function for that which is paraphusin. Now, well, let's go ahead and read 27 so we can address all of it together. Likewise, in the same fashion, so you can't break this up. Likewise, also, the men abandoning the natural function of the woman burned in their desire eis allelus. This is not pederasty. This is not an older man with a younger man. This is a mutual relationship. Eis allelus, one to another. Men with men committing indecent acts, and receiving in their own persons the due penalty of their error. Now, many homosexual scholars will admit that what we have here, without question, is a discussion not only of male homosexuality, but verse 26 may well be the only place in Scripture where we have a direct reference to lesbianism, to female homosexuality. And there are many that we could point to. Bob Gagnon has done the yeoman's work in putting all this together, where he will quote numerous lesbian scholars, male homosexual scholars, who say there isn't any question about what Paul's talking about here. He is talking about homosexual relationships, male and female, and that they are indecent, and that's why we just simply have to contextualize Paul and say that was then, this is now, we move on from there. They don't even try to do the revisionist thing. It's rather obvious in the context that we're talking about the natural use of the woman and the natural use of the man, that this has biological components. There's all sorts of components that would be involved in this. But that what Paul is doing, remember, diatuta, for this reason, it's right there at verse 26. Why does Paul raise this issue? Well, it is an example of the paradidomi that results from the metalaxon, the exchanging of the truth of God for a lie. And all the way through Romans 1, he's been saying this suppression of the truth of God results in a fundamental change inwardly in man, and he uses as an example of this, nothing can be more basic than the sexual urge. God has placed it within us because that's how the species continues. And I know we live in a day where we've all been told that we too many people, all the rest of the stuff. As a result, we're having population crashes, and the next 50, 60 years, you're going to see massive problems. I mean, the Japanese are developing robots to take care of their old people because they're not reproducing. And we're going to see what happens when we don't reproduce. The biggest fundamental change in the experience of human life over the past 100 years is birth control. No question about it. No question about it. We've all been impacted by it. Every single one of us. Even all you Roman Catholics sitting in the audience going, yeah, what about us? Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. Anyway, what is being said in Romans chapter 1 is consistent all the way through. The basic sexual desire that is placed within man, that is not evil in and of itself, in any way, shape, or form. Even it can be twisted and turned when you suppress the knowledge of God and exchange that truth of God for a lie. That's the whole point. That's the whole point. The power of handling the Word of God consistently and following contextual arguments is right here. Because what you're going to find in all the revisionist books and all the revisionist arguments, well, we just don't know. It's a tough passage. Wow, so many things we need to deal with. Are you really telling me that the beginning of his epistle, where he's laying the very foundation for everything he's going to say, that Paul purposely presented the church at Rome a completely inscrutable message? I'm not, that Paul, he just ran off into the woods someplace there in the first few chapters. We have no idea. If we don't know what Paul's saying here, then we have no earthly idea what he's saying when he gets to justification, do we? That's what a lot of people want to tell us. That's what a lot of people want to tell us. And I say, no. He's clear. The argument is clear. He's talking about God made man. He has revealed himself. Man is unapologetus, without an apologetic, without an excuse. The line of argument flows all the way through here, and he uses homosexual behavior, drawing from not only the creation ordinance, but based upon the consistent understanding of all the Jewish people of his day, that this was sinful. He's not making any attempt to run off to extra biblical sources that you have to be a part of this philosophical group to really get to Paul's argument, or that philosophical group. No. He is making a consistent argument that is clear and understandable, and homosexuality is the example he gives of how even the most basic created needs and desires we have can be twisted and turned to futility. Because homosexuality is futile. It does not produce life, and cannot by nature. It can't. What we're seeing in our society is such a 180 black and white rebellion against God. We are seeing Isaiah 5, calling white black and black white, good evil and evil good, is that we are being told that we must affirm that which only destroys life is actually life-affirming. We are being asked to lie. Isn't that what this text is all about? Exchanging the truth of God for the lie. Yeah, there we are. There we are.